Hello and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance. Here, where we talk about all things spiritual, metaphysical. We're sharing things common from the East Coast to the West Coast and everything in between. As healers, support systems, conduits, there's so many different names for what Katrina and I do. We bring our
Some of them aren't great, too.
no, some of them are not.
Really tricky at that.
But we bring that experience to the table and hope that in sharing that with you all, you get a different perspective and maybe you take that journey of self healing yourself. So, with that, if this is your first time joining us, I'll do all the official things like and subscribe and share and all that. So, you know that we go live every Thursday. It's like 5-ish most Thursdays. Um,
Eastern time.
Eastern time, and oh yes, and if you're on in any other part of the country or world, find your time zone. But if you're on the West Coast like
You know where
Katrina's
you are.
too, right?
Do the math.
Um,
Work,
you
work,
know,
work. All we do is work.
we are going to shoot from the hip and tell you what's on our mind. We're not going to sugarcoat anything. We say bad words. So if you are easily offended, go ahead and pull your pearls out, clutch them as needed. And it has a beautiful necklace, by the way. I
Thank
keep
you.
looking at it.
Thank you.
Um, and just sit back for the ride. I mean, it's supposed to be fun. Spirituality, all of that is supposed to be a good time because otherwise you will lose your mind. So
That right there is toxic spirituality.
right, which is
Demonstrated.
brings us to a great point. What are we talking about
It's
today?
always supposed to be fun.
Yeah. So if you caught our little like we send out like a little hey, we're going live announcement. One of the things that we're going to cover today is toxic spirituality. It's a thing, just like toxic positivity and all those other toxicity is real in the wellness and change communities. And so we're here to talk a little bit about that, what we see, what we've come across. And part of that journey is a discussion on entities and attachments. So if you've not viewed us before, I know I said that earlier, I'm not like the best with words sometimes, but if this is your first time joining us, let's do some introductions. I am Dahlia Rose over here at Crystal Cognizance on the East Coast, where I serve my community, hosting events, meditations, healing sessions, doing spiritual counseling, bringing out the cards, channeling otherworldly beings, and just being the best spiritual auntie that I can for the people that find me.
Spiritual auntie. That's great.
And I have an amazing co-host with me.
Hi, I'm Katrina Raspel, and I'm updating my Facebook. Uh, I didn't. I wanted to put the broadcast on there. So, hi, I'm Katrina Raspel. I am half of the team that owns Crossroads Occult at crossroadsoccult.com, and we specialize in handmade magical products, hoodoo products, and candles and oils and incenses and all kinds of things, everything that you need magically, pretty much. And we have done this for decades. My husband and I did it for a while before I was with him. So it's been a long run here. And we live in Kelsey, California, which is as far away from Dahlia as I could possibly get, not on purpose. It just happened that way, and now it's my great dismay. And
Oh,
we have been active in the Sacramento pagan community for around 26 years together. So that's what we do. We do lectures, we do online teaching, live streaming. Um, and my specialty is what one of the topics we're going to talk about today, which is removing entities, and also I work on psychic attacks and spiritual cleansings. I do readings, things like that. So that's what I do. And Dahlia actually chose today's subject. She has this incredible knack for. I have this blank mind, and I just message her, "What do you want to talk about?" And she'll say, "Well, why don't we talk about this?" And she just pulls out this amazing subject. And today she pulled out two, and I'm so excited to get into these topics with you. They're going to be so interesting and so nuanced And so, yeah, get ready, go pee and pause us because this is going to be a long conversation.
Pee, pause, get your
Pee,
water,
pause,
whatever.
return.
Get your pillow because your butt might go numb from sitting there watching us. So,
Get your drink.
um, you know, the topic of entities and attachments, it's such an it goes in so many different directions, along with toxic positivity, toxic spirituality. It's hard to know where to begin, because it does go in so many different directions. So, what I will say is one of the things that I know I combat the most is people feeling like just because they exist, that there is something attached to them, that somehow they are the worst individual on the planet, and therefore their toxic energy, like I've had people be like, okay, I need to take a spiritual bath before I see you because I don't want to bring my stuff. And I'm like, the whole reason you're coming to see me is what you're experiencing. What could you possibly have to cleanse off of you that I
Mhm.
could not be prepared for?
Yeah, don't clean your house before the maids come.
Right, right. I mean, maybe put your underwear away, but that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
basic. So, I thought it'd be worth addressing live. We talk about these kinds of things like piecemeal throughout the show. We talk about managing them. So, you know that the answer at the end of the day is management. But, Katrina, how do you define um, entities and attachments? Because they are different.
They are. And, different people have different definitions of them, different healers. And really, having somebody feel like they're a bad person for having an entity or having an attachment is sort of like them feeling like they're a bad person for having a bad cold,
Mm,
because it's something that happens to almost all of us, usually multiple times through our lives. The thing is that most people don't ever get them cleaned up. And so you walk around with these guys, and then
yep,
you end up with them talking to each other and working cooperatively. Even if they didn't know each other before, they now have a common goal, which is jacking up your life and
right.
taking your energy. And so they start recognizing that common goal and working together. So the way that I would define those, there are different kinds of entities. Now, first, there is the entity that grows from, it's kind of like, oh, what were them things called? Remember Transformers and those little GoBots that take all, like Optimus Prime was all these little vehicles together or something like
Yeah,
that. It's kind of like
yeah,
that, where sometimes all of the maladies that you have attracted to you, the curses, the psychic attacks, the frustration, the psychic turbulence that you have, all comes together to begin to work cooperatively toward your
hmm,
downfall, and that creates an entity form. So that's one kind. The other kind is, there's actually three kinds. The other kind is the kind you pick up incidentally. So you're in a store and you
hmm,
happen to walk past somebody and you start to feel heavy, you start to feel uncomfortable, and you think, wow, I must be getting sick. And meanwhile, the person that just walked past you went, oh my gosh, I feel better than I have in
right.
days.
Woo!
Woo-wee! So something jumped from them to you because they were all chewed up like gum and you're all tasty. So they're like, whoo, I'm going to jump ship to this one like
Right.
fleas and get in there where it's all new and fresh and good. So those are two different kinds of entities. There's the composite kind that basically become thought forms
Hmm.
by working together. There's the kind that jumps from person to person. But the third kind is the kind that we usually don't deal with, fortunately. And those are the ones that people actually conjure up to go get somebody. So they want to send an entity after somebody because they're all Necronomicon and that sort of thing. And so, in their mom's basement, reading it line by line in their wizard cloak. But, you have people that will call up demons and different types of entities to go find a specific person and create problems for them. So those are the three that I primarily work with. That is a little bit different for me, and again, different people define these things in different ways, than an attachment would be. and I see a few different kinds of attachments. One is the very low level of attachment, which is something that is your devil. It's basically what holds you back. So, is it a habit, like like if you have a bad relationship with food, or you are a smoker and you need to quit, or you're an alcoholic and you need to stop drinking, or you're a workaholic and you need more balance in your life? What is it that holds you back and keeps you from having the quality of life that you want? That itself is an attachment that is a problem. It can also be a relationship that's a problem, that's very toxic. So that's one form of energetic attachment that can be a problem for you. Another form of attachment is when a person is meditating or doing astral travel, or they're working on different levels than our physical level, and they go up there and they get stuff stuck to them and come back with it. And I got to tell you, the entities that are out there and about, they're not all good entities. They're not all folks. They didn't all use everything out there. Isn't somebody's intelligent ancestor or something. There's some
Right.
nasty stuff out there, and you get all these people. And I don't know if you get this or not, Dahlia, but you get people that get off on going up in the astral and having astral sex with these things, coming back with astral STDs, and I got to go in and do the ream and scream and clean them out. So,
Remix.
you know,
I
so
don't get too many astral sex people.
Lord, I
Definitely
don't,
people who are, out in the ethers and they pick up nasty shit, but
yeah,
not intentionally through astral sex. That one I've had
I
the
got a
privilege
couple of
of avoiding.
those. Yeah. And for women, it'll set up right in the uterus. For men, it'll set up right in the scrot. And, the energy just gets all nasty and built up in there, because these entities, when they attach to you sexually, they get very possessive, and they do not want you responding to other people, or to actual
Yeah.
people of your species. And so those are the types of attachments and entities that I primarily with in what I do. And I know that there are lots of other ones, but that's my most common ones that I hit on. That's the long
And
definition.
well, and my definitions don't differ too much away from what you've said. I usually am having conversations about, energetic buildup, and there's space in my practice where I've seen attachments accumulate to the point where they then become an entity, grow their own voice, et cetera, et cetera. And
Hmm.
then, what ends up happening is a conversation between the energy field and the entity or the attachment that creates um, additional wounding or exposure. So we start having conversations like I compare these things to that what is it called, the Mucinex commercial. You have a little
Yeah,
thing, the little booger
good.
in your lungs. It's like, I'm gonna move in here, it starts moving shit around, and then people are like, oh, like I understand that I don't always have to do something to pick this up. The other thing that one of my mentors would comment on, she's from Peru, and she would talk about how there were shamans in her country, or, magical people or brujas or whatever, who would just sort of try to antagonize souls out of opportunity.
Yeah.
So you happen to be in the astral realm and they spot you and they're like, oh, okay, what holes can I poke in this? Because it seems like a vulnerable energy or a
Hmm.
vulnerable person who maybe doesn't know themselves real well, or, is just dicking around because they saw something on the internet. Let me, go on and pursue that energy, or antagonize it in such a way that I benefit. And
Hmm.
so she called them naughty shamans. So, it was a frequent discussion that we had, because I was like, how can someone perform miracles or seemingly miraculous things and be such a dirtbag? And she was like, talent. And I was like, what? What do you mean? And it is the ability to accumulate so much energy that you can facilitate a transformation and still go on to live your dirtbag life.
Yep.
And so that was a new concept for me, but that is where I found myself being able to see more instead of remaining in a place of denial that, people aren't capable of these things and it has to be personal. When I opened my eyes to the fact that it does not have to be personal, I could see more of what maladies were oppressing people just out of opportunity.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Everything that we do takes energy. And
hmm
when we work, this is so dorky. We used to call it working in the light. But when we are working on the right side of Jesus, we're good people. Um, our ideal situation is that we are a conduit for divine energy that comes through. But I tell
hmm
you what, when you are running energy, even divine energy, even God energy, to heal somebody, you can feel that it's draining you, even though you are being very careful about just being a conduit for the energy, it's still tiring.
yep,
And, if I have a day when I'm doing 6 or 7 cleansings in a day, that's exhausting. Even though I'm using divine energy, conducting the energy is exhausting. And so that's why a lot of people are that do this sort of thing look for other ways to amplify their energy. And
hmm
for some of them, being up there in the astral and finding somebody that's just up there fucking around, their idea is, well, clearly they got energy to burn because they're up here, jacking off in the astral when they got no business being here. So I'm just going to tap into some of their excess there. They got more than what they need and just
yeah.
tank that energy. And I have known, like one of my mentors would do that and didn't think twice about it because,
Yeah,
his idea was you got more than what you need and you're up here slinging it around. I don't mind taking it.
and that's wild. One of the things that I love about you, Katrina, is you will talk about justification, right? And how that can be a determining factor in the things that you do. Not saying, and I guess what I'm trying to draw a comparison here is how is that justified, right? Like one of the it doesn't seem justified just because
Mm-hmm.
excess is there, right? Like that's like saying, well, there was extra food on the table and nobody was going to touch it.
Right.
Like, you know, but as far as entities and attachments are concerned, I believe that they operate the same way, So now
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of dealing with human beings that can do that to you and entities and attachments that will do the same. And we aren't trying to stir fear here,
No,
but
no.
but like bringing awareness, like I was saying, when I could see the more that you could see of a situation, the more roads and avenues you have to manage it, to I don't think this is another thing that I wanted to bring up with regard to entities and attachments. I don't necessarily believe that there is a place where these things will never have an opportunity. I think that the more you know, the better off you are, and the higher you go, the more spiritual strength you gain, the bigger the boss. And there's always balance for every piece of light that can be had. There is going to be something opposite that
Mm-hmm.
to be encountered, and you may find yourself you know doing more cleansing than you would avoidance or prevention, at
I
least in my
love
opinion.
I love what you're saying here because of how it pertains to our next topic. And it's very common that people will put positivity onto magic in regard to entities
Hmm
because they will have that attitude of, there's only bad stuff out there if you're bad.
yeah, yeah.
You'll attract it in. But no, I mean, when you're talking about the acknowledgement and the awareness of what's out there, that's just responsible. And so it is so important that people do know that there's stuff out there that can mess you up. you're not going to just meditate and end up getting attacked or anything usually. But if you're working on higher levels and you're not prepared to do the type of shielding and protection that's necessary to do that, you can run into some trouble. And also, even if you do shield yourself, you can run into some trouble.
Yeah, that's like being a driver and expecting that because you're a good driver,
Yes.
everyone
Yeah.
around you is
Yeah.
going to do the same. It's just not going to happen that way.
No,
So,
that's exactly true. And, it's not trying to get everybody to be terrified of exploring. It's just being aware. And we don't know the, ah, I gotta really throw out a euphemism here. I was told a long time ago, and it's really struck with me that the idea that we only work good magic or we only do good magic comes from a position of profound privilege.
mm,
And, 'cause that's like saying I would never steal from anybody. Well, if your kids are hungry and there's bread in the marketplace, you will steal that bread to feed your kids. You know,
yeah,
there are always circumstances. We should never say, I would never, because I would never means I have not been put in a situation where that was something I had to do in my life. And it's the
right,
same thing with magic. Um, we can say, these are just assholes and these are just people that are dirtbags, and yeah, okay, I agree. But at the same time, we have to be aware that these types of people are out there. And if
right,
we don't know that they're out there, it means we have never had the misfortune of encountering one.
right.
So that comes back to the idea of a position of privilege of, everything is really, rainbows and unicorns out there. And it's just not. It's really easy for somebody who was raised in the Hamptons, to talk about how great, New York is without having gone to the slums, without having seen the danger that can be out there.
And, you know, this reminds me of I have this really amazing soul in my life who recently put out there that, you will always be the villain in someone's story.
Mm,
And there are instances where I know that, cutting cords or, you know, protecting somebody's energy from another person hurt somebody else because the disconnect that happens energetically is not it's not even. And so a lot of times, even when we're doing positive work to separate the energies, somebody feels
mhm,
that pull, somebody feels that yank of the cord, and it is their emotional state that will tell them this is good or this is bad, not
mhm.
the intention of the healer or the
Right.
person working on them to you know to determine. My mentor used to say, not used to, this is how she believes. She will, like, when she's cutting cords, she'll put them in this, like, what she called a love pot. She'll put both ends of the cords in there, and so, whatever's happening, nobody really realizes that they're no longer getting the energy of the person. They're no longer draining the
Mhm,
source. They're
mhm.
draining from the love pot. And I was like, well, that's, it's a beautiful, admirable thing. But I can remember many occasions where I forgot the fucking love pot. And I was just like,
Yeah,
nope, you're not, you don't belong here.
right.
And that's the end of the story. The person that I'm working for or working with is now feeling whole and safe in their bodies. My
Mhm,
purpose and my job is to make their bodies safe once again.
mhm.
And I will do that at the expense of a person they believe is not safe.
Well, and we always work as our client's advocate. So
Hmm.
we are team client. The
Yep.
problem is that client lies to us. And whether it's intentional to try to garner some kind of favoritism from us or to make sure that we're going to be in their court, or it's unintentional, such as they don't have all the information, or just, quite frankly, they're not living the other person's life. They don't know their mind. They presume their mind.
Hmm.
So we are always eternally affecting somebody else with the magic we're doing for our client. And that's just a reality that we have to sign on for when we become a healer. And we are working magic and moving energy to affect an outcome that is going to change the life of another person we don't even know and who is not in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And so when you are removing attachments and entities, I think there's space in this conversation to talk about who originally sent it, because that's another thing that I'm seeing on like on some I'm not even gonna say which social media sites, but it's out there where people are like, well, if you do this, you can send this kind of energy to that person and, inflict harm or what have you. And one thing that is coming up, um, that I'm seeing people ask me about is, can you send this back to the person that sent it to me? And when I get that question, oftentimes my response is just plain old no. Like, one, it's going to take a lot of energy on my part to go through the process of sending it back, when I could just either change the energy or banish the energy and be done with it. I see no point in doing that. But now, to further empower this entity, this attachment, to go back and haunt the person that sent it, I don't know. I don't see a real point in that, as it sounds like the assumption is that they'll learn their lesson from it, and they probably won't. What are your thoughts on reversing and
Well,
sending things back?
anytime I'm doing work on somebody and it comes out in the forensics basically that there is an entity, that there is something attached to them, the first thing people want to know is who sent it, where did it come
Yep.
from? And I just tell them straight out, I don't do that kind of work. I'm not the cop or the detective who goes out and finds out who stabbed you. I'm the doctor that sews up the wound.
Right.
So, and all of a sudden they start running that mental rolodex of, I bet it was my sister-in-law, who always, she was a witch and I'm sure she did it. And the thing is, you don't know how long that entity was attached to that person. It could have hooked up to them when they were a baby. It could have been a
Hmm.
generational thing that came through. You don't know. You just don't know. And so as far as returning it, I look at entities as energy. They can't be created or destroyed. They can only be rerouted or,
Right.
like you said, banished. It's going to go somewhere. I have had occasions where I would send it back to the person who sent it, only because my idea is, you're the person that called this up. You're the person that's going to have to deal with it.
Okay, that's fair.
So here's your little friend. Y'all play, figure out what you're doing, but this is off limits. You can't be
Right.
over here. The other thing I'll sometimes do, and this is a higher level thing, and you talk about a lot of energy, is to send the demon back to where it came from,
Hmm.
which can be tougher. But I usually just go for the banishing and just go, nope, you can't be here.
Right.
So,
Well, and some of what you were saying about the mental Rolodex is a bit of toxic spirituality, and this dives into religion as well. Like, if your frame of reference is religious, it's still spiritual. And if your frame of reference is, as this person is earmark themselves as a witch, or as an energy healer, and it's just different from what you know or do, they must be filled with and riddled with these sort of negative energies. And that's toxic spirituality, because you
mhm.
haven't one of the things that I saw when we were looking up this term was how toxic spirituality is the use of fear, shame, and guilt in order to bring about, like, a push for some higher minded concept, like, like you said, you must be positive to bring positive things, or you must be a good person. It's the you must be pure of heart in order to interact with the
Yeah.
unicorn theme, right? Like that unicorn probably does
Yeah.
some real nasty shit that you don't even know about. And it's not looking for the person who has never sinned or committed an atrocity. It's looking for the intention behind how that person lives. Are you seeking to drain others because you cannot cultivate your own energy, or are you living in a space of equanimity among people, or balance in life, or whatever it is. I mean, and it doesn't all look positive. Balance will not always
Mhm.
look positive.
No. And the other side we have to look at is life isn't fair.
No.
And we don't understand balance. We perceive balance based on what we see and our limited understanding. But we do not understand why everything happens the way it does. And one of the hallmarks of um, toxic spirituality, there's a few that are pretty common and that we hear all the time. And one is everything happens for a reason. And that's supposed to make everything okay. And it
Right.
doesn't. Everything does happen for a reason, but some of those reasons are not interesting in the least. And some of those reasons don't even have anything to do with us.
Right.
And somehow the idea that everything happens for a reason is supposed to negate our grieving or negate our frustration or our anger. Just because it happened for a reason doesn't mean that we are having a positive reaction to it happening. And that leads us into the idea that we should always, especially as spiritual leaders, we should always be happy. That
Mm.
we should be at such a high level of performance, so to speak, that we are always content and joyful and happy. And, we were given these emotions for reasons. And our job is to use them productively, not to not feel them.
Right.
Another thing I hear a lot is, just focus on the good stuff. Focus on the good stuff. And that is spiritual gaslighting.
Yep.
That is saying, hey, this bad stuff doesn't matter. You need to ignore that and look at the fact that you've got food on the table and a house to live in. No, it doesn't change that there's bad stuff that's happening. And we have to deal with those things. We have to realistically look at those things and we have to feel what we feel. And you and I deal with people all the time that are riddled with toxicity because they have had
Mhm.
to bite down words. They've had to swallow shit that they don't want to deal with because they've been told not to express it. They've been told not to be angry.
Yeah, and it is one of those things that's like you should be grateful to even have that, and it doesn't allow you the space to build the tools you need to manage it. It's
Right.
completely dismissive, and
Mhm.
it doesn't lead to anything. I have to say, what I have seen in my practice and what I have seen of my own experiences is that when we apply the tools and principles that we gain in the worst of our moments, everything rockets forward. I know when I've come to some realizations of blocks, and rather than just being like, oh no, I'm being negative, but actually sat with the emotions. And I'd love to hear from our audience if this has been the case for you.
In this case, our audience is Denise, I think.
Everybody else in the ethers, like, when you finally sit down and you actually move through the emotion without the shoulds, the shouldn'ts, and the judgment, you rocket forward. Abundance falls from the sky. You
Mhm.
find your community, you find stability, and then everybody's looking at you like, man, how do I get like that? And you're like, there is no getting like this. Just drop all the other shit and you'll be there. Like, you're already there, but you have bags full of, like Katrina was saying, toxicity. And there's no reason to carry that around. It's just not.
And something different that you're describing perfectly, is when we talk about, people think of positive spirituality as smiling no matter what, being
Mm,
happy no matter what comes to you. It's not that. You're responsible, and this is another big toxic spirituality thing, saying that you're responsible for all the circumstances in your life. That uh, people came into this idea when Marianne Williamson was really working with the laws of attraction ideas.
mm,
And laws of attraction state that you draw to you the energy that you put out there, basically. And that's true, but it's so much more than that. And
right.
so people who have only surfacely studied it say these things like, well, if something's happening in your life, you drew that to you, and they make you responsible for getting mugged, or they make you responsible for things that happen in your life. And like I said before, life is not always fair. Good stuff does, or bad stuff does happen to good people. That is a reality.
Yeah.
And what you're responsible for is how you manage that. And what you were describing is exactly right, that there are certain techniques we have to use to be self-aware and feel what we feel and come out of that in a positive way. And that's different. What you're describing, though, when you let go of all that toxicity, is authentic positivity. And there's that feeling of authentic spiritual wholeness that comes. And that's really what our goal is there. It's not just pretending, smiling for the camera and pretending
Yeah.
everything is okay when you're falling apart inside, and when you're struggling and having a hard time with stuff that's happened. And you can have a hard time and be struggling and still be authentically positive and authentically spiritual. In fact, those times when you're struggling are really your most authentic moments,
Hmm.
and some of your most sacred moments. I mean, like they say, there's no atheist in foxholes. When when you're in jeopardy and you're dealing with struggles, that's when you're closest to God.
Yep. 1000%.
Yeah. So a lot of people also bring ego into the conversation about toxic
Mm,
spirituality and acting as, now we talk a lot about ego in our bio universal healing series, and about not letting ego become something toxic to your healing practice. And we see this all the time in people who run covens and people who are spiritual leaders of any kind. They start to come from a perspective that they are God, that they are um, what is sacred and holy about this process. And it's not that people aren't
mm.
sacred and holy, but they set themselves up as more than a person having a spiritual experience.
Right.
And
Like as if to be worshipped by
yes.
their group.
And so there is a balance with ego. Ego is important. Ego is a beloved part of us. But ego can also, it's like having that crazy friend where they're a lot of fun until they're not. And ego is that crazy friend. Ego is a lot of fun and it's important until it gets megalomaniaed out and you are living in a place of ego. So let ego be a part of your personality and not your entire personality. Another thing I see people really struggling with on toxic positivity, and you might see this in toxic spirituality, the idea that you absolutely have to meditate to do good magic.
Oh.
I
Or
see
do
that
good anything. Like
all the
there's
time.
so many things about meditation that are misconstrued, mislabeled. I've had people come in here and they're like, "Well, so and so told me that I need to meditate, but I'm just having the worst time." And it ends up leaving them feeling like they are dumb, unable to do it, that they cannot possibly attain self-realization, or like all these things they won't be able to reach because they cannot meditate in the way that they've seen on the internet, or in ways that their friends have described. And meditation is a gateway, but it's not the only door.
That's
So
so
yeah,
true.
that's one of my biggest pet peeves. AJ was
Yep.
talking about just before you get too far away
Right.
from the
I was just going
the
to look at that. I love this. And what I want to say, and this is very important, I hope everybody hears this. Again, Eric and I ran one coven for 22 years, and I ran covens before he and I got together. And listen, seriously, if you are in a group and they are not accepting of your authentic self and who you are, and you're finding that you have to be fake in those magical circles, that is not the group for you. And you are, in fact, going to contribute negatively to that circle experience for other people. So it's important to recognize and separate yourself out if you are not able to be authentic. Now, sometimes being authentic means that you're making every ritual about you and that you're taking over. So pay attention to how you're expressing your authentic self. But if you're being told to just fake your feelings, that's not a good place to be. And there are plenty of other groups out there. So,
and that's a great life rule. You
yeah.
know, if you are being told to not be yourself in a company, if you are told to be not be yourself in a relationship, you know, it may be time to ask some additional questions, like, and
Mhm.
start with, is this where I belong? You know, is this going to allow me to grow or smother me and snuff out my fire? Like, what's there are opportunities to grow in every situation in life. And I think that one thing that we are pushed to do is settle for, you know, what we can get as opposed to what will amplify me. Like this must
Mhm.
be it because this is the best I've had. That's not true in any scenario.
Mhm.
Any scenario. So
And
never making
also,
you shouldn't be making decisions from that place. Go ahead.
you use your listening skills. If you perceive someone is asking you to be inauthentic about yourself, use your listening skills and try to discern exactly what they're saying. Are they saying you can't be who you are when you're with me? Or are they saying you can't be authentic in the Walmart when when you're screaming at me for something that I did 3 days ago?
Mm.
Is it a time and place thing, or is it you can't be authentic with me? There's also room for gaslighting here too, because sometimes a person is just setting a boundary and saying, you can't talk to me that way. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
can talk to me that way. And what you're feeling is, well, my authentic self communicates in that way. And so really look at your behavior to see if perhaps you're behaving in such a way that is not appropriate versus, no, we can't talk about the fact that you're an alcoholic and that's impacting my life.
Right. And there's space in this conversation that we're having about authenticity to bring back in the discussion on entities and attachments because this is how they connect. That
Yes.
is one of the most common ways that you are going to pick up an entity or an attachment is inauthenticity because it weakens the field. And if it's
Mhm.
there long enough or you've been faking it long enough, then you will wear away the protective shielding that you have, and that stuff will just get right in.
When you are putting on an act as a human being in any circumstance, you are creating a rift with your spirit. It's
Mhm.
called spiritual discognizance, or it's a lack of integrity to the spirit, an incongruity to the spirit. And that's a weakness in your shield.
Yep.
And
One of the
so you
ways
got to be you.
one of the ways that that comes up in some of the work that I do is because you said the word integrity. There's less energetic integrity present. So to have spiritual or to have energetic integrity means that all of your energy is here in the present moment. But if you've what ifed yourself away, or if you have chucked away parts of your soul because of acceptance needed or love trying to be obtained, you have less energetic integrity in the present, and therefore less to expend on you, yourself, the things you're involved in, and even the people that you're dealing with. I mean, one of the ways that this shows up is like people will say like, oh well, I want to be a better person for, my kids, my family, whatever. But if you've been inauthentic and not allowing enough of that energetic integrity to remain, because by the time you get home from faking it at work, there's nothing left. You're not even giving what you desire at that point.
Mhm.
You are giving them a quarter, a piece, maybe even, half of a half. That'd be a quarter. But you're giving a lot less than you're hoping. And is it really worth it at that point? Do they want that, or do they want
Mhm.
all of you?
You
You
are
know.
so right. And when we're talking about spiritual authenticity, you hit on something that is the keystone of that, and that is to stay centered in the present. So many people worry so much that they're constantly future centered,
Mm-hmm.
or they're so guilty and obsessed that they're past centered. And the future is mutable. You can change any of that. The past is done. So the more that we can stay engaged in the present moment, the more here that we are, the more authentic we can be. So I completely sign off on that 100%. So I think that something we should look at before we go is, if you find that you are perhaps living some of this spiritual toxicity, which all of us are to some degree, what do you do? And one of the most toxic things you can do is to go into this place of guilt or self-recrimination and say, "Well, I'm a bad person because I'm always trying to see the positive." And that's not the case. What you can do is what Dahlia was saying earlier: stop and evaluate. What is happening in your life? How much of this can you reasonably change? How much of it that you can't change can you release
Mm-hmm.
from your toxic amassing? And if you need to book an appointment with me or with Dahlia to talk about this, that's what we do. We're happy to provide consultation. We do it all the time, but evaluate. And part of that evaluation is to pray
Mm-hmm.
and to look to your ancestors, look to whatever divine figures you embrace. Ask them to help you, ask them to give you insight as to where you are right now, who you are, how you can be more authentic and not fake, toxic spirituality. Another thing is to do, if something's happening to you where you're going through stuff, ask yourself, is this something that's actually bad that's happening?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this a change? And I don't like change.
Yep. Very powerful question.
Because sometimes it's just changing, and change can just as easily take you to a good place as a bad place. And sometimes we do actually just have to relax and let that change happen to get to a better place, even if it's hard. Sometimes you have to unclog all of that mess and find your safe person you're going to talk to. But
And to add to that,
yeah.
if you are in survival mode and you need that assistance, don't be afraid to reach out. If you have challenges with, God or ancestors or whatever, and the thing that you reach for is your higher self,
Mhm.
just as valuable. If you have no concept of these sort of spiritual things or higher minded things, your body has a lot of wisdom in it as well. So the undergirding theme here is ask questions, and sometimes that wisdom will be in your body. Sometimes it'll be something somewhere above you, and ultimately, I think what we're headed towards, or what we should be headed towards as a people, is that it's going to be both. Your body's going to have a lot to say, and so are the beings and spiritual connections that you have.
Talk to your trusted friends too. If you don't want to work with a higher power or a higher self, just one of your friends that you know you can depend on, that really sees you. Talk to
Mhm.
them and get their impressions, and hopefully they will be authentic enough with you to not just say, "Oh, you're perfect the way you are," and Mr. Rogers you, but just give you some good insight as to what they're seeing, and what they feel could be helpful. And by all means, your phrasing of things is so important. And this is something I see, and I know Dahlia sees. People can't tend to, when they're going through any type of crisis or toxicity, they tend to catastrophize it
Mhm.
and use really dynamic language like, this is the worst thing that could ever happen, or I am so devastated. And just, they really top it out. And yes, I understand those things are devastating. When you're cheated on, it's devastating. When you
Mhm.
lose your home, it's devastating. But when you say those words over and over and over, you affirm that.
Yep.
And my grandmother was an excellent example of ways to say things in that don't create negative outcomes. I never saw her not love anyone, but
Mhm.
my mother married a man she genuinely did not like. My grandmother did not like this man. And when I asked my grandmother, "Well, what do you think of him?" My grandmother said, and this is the worst thing I ever heard her say about a human ever. She said, "Well, some people are just harder to love." And she had this spin. And so watch your phrasing. Is this really the worst thing that could happen, or is this just really challenging?
There's that authenticity piece again.
Yeah.
Like authentically speak about what is happening, not to garner, sympathy or to people aren't going to understand if I don't make this the worst possible thing to happen to me. So let me just phrase that. But to dive in, and if you've not done it, maybe you lack the phrasing, but get in there and say, okay, it's okay to explain that this reminds you of one of the worst things that's ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might find hope without it being toxic positivity or toxic
Sure.
spirituality. You haven't bypassed anything, you've
Mm-hmm.
tied it to something in your past that brought you pain. And some of that is leaking forward, but wait, let me shut the valve off because I
Mm-hmm.
realize these are two separate events.
This reminds me of this. And sometimes this is the worst. This is literally the worst thing that's happened to me so far. And
Hmm.
but at the same time, that doesn't mean you can't cope with it. You might not know how to right now. And those are the things you need to tap on with EFT. Those are the things you need to think about and pray about. Is it's okay that I don't know how to manage this.
Yeah.
I can talk to people, I can pray about it, I can journal about it. I can wait and see what happens when the world turns a time or two.
Yep.
But right now I don't know what to do to fix this, and that's okay.
One of my favorite things about embodiment is applying slow, sustained pressure to, an area that needs treatment. And I feel like that translates to spiritual concepts. Apply slow, sustained pressure and see what happens, see what comes up. And what we're talking about, sort of at the end of the show, is ways in which you can move through processes with entities and with attachments so that they leave, so that they slide off, so that the banishing process is easier. The more that we engage in this sort of questioning, awareness, and knowing and integration, the less these things have to plug into or attach themselves to. You become like cellophane. Some stuff's gonna stick and some stuff is not. And at the end of the day, that's all that life is. Some shit's gonna stick and some of it's gonna slide off. So that's what we have, guys. I mean, I think that we could probably spend another 45 minutes on the topic because there is no shortage of ways to detach entities, attachments, and I, between the two of us, we have some stories of things that we've seen. But hopefully, at the very least, in this hour, you have gotten something or some level of inspiration to know that you are empowered. And even if you have something attached to you, a very common question that both of us get, what do you see? Is my energy that bad? The answer is probably no. Most of the time, I know I'm telling people I've seen worse. But, Katrina outlined some really great identifiers as far as attachments so that you can see kind of what level you're at. And the conversation that we're having is a way to rise above it all without bypassing the needed work. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, share your stories in the comments, and we'd love to hear from you. But for now, we're going to put this in the fridge and we'll bring out the leftovers next week. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.